Piša to datri alfohdahsar šarele Assyriateve bafrosejve. وموزبنا وهاوي Assyriateve uqolo حيرو uqolo شاريو دوعامو Suryoye ببريثو. وأوني شد Assyriateve دماحت فرجونو بوفوكوس ودنوقل الطيبة وشرشو تتكون بين دوعاميذن لبريثو كولا. لجن Assyriateve تقودرم داوم بوفلحونيذي قلو زملي إم عذرون ثثخو. إذا كورحميتو أو شغلت Assyriateve وكوحوزيتو إلصويثد Assyriateve بو حقلو دي ميديا مصوحينا ساقيد معضريتو Assyriateve. درب مشحلفة كبخ معضريتو Assyriateve. كبخو هويتو هادومي بو فيسبوك منيونو تزوزة ناعيمة. أو إنقلد رحميتو دهويتو هادومي بو يوتيوب تاموستب مليون تزوزة ناعيمة. كبعيتو دهوال خميديات كتلة قولو حيرو ودلتيو ما صرتو عم قابش وتوسي توكوسي وأوعيتا ووثي مقوايو Assyriateve مقوايو وقولتخو بميديا.
شلام عليكم حزر حيمة ماركة مبث صوبو سالامانكا كلن عضو حاضرة هرجة بو نينوي تشير كونغرس تحاضر مالفونو أفرام يلدس و نينوي تشير كونغرس منيو حزر حيمة هانو كرسي أكاديميكويو حكي بهويلة إمكان درس لهرجة علي هيوثو وعلو مكتب زبنو ليشونو دو عاميذن عود حزر حمك كبنا دمينا خو دا أترجمة رشموي جبودن وماخا كبعينا دم عزمنا خو تفشوتو أعمينا إشمو قد محوينا أترجمة وانترفيوات شافيرة والصوية هركي حاضري غلبة عامة من دول مشحلفة وهولينا قاي حزر حمك كبنا خو فشوتن أعمينا هركي بوبث تصوبو سالامانكا.
مفرجاني ميقري هركي كوحوزيتو منا محوينا بخوميلر والستيوبة صوبو وعدو أدقدو ثم قد سيمي مملي ترقومي حوزيتنا الأروال مبنيونو عدو قبودن أي تويوثي أترقومي يعني رشموية قبودن وشوطانو وبيت صوبو مقابل دحذو كاتدرال غلبة شافرتو إذحتو يو هركي وسلامانكا دي لونو يو غلبة بلاي مكتب زبنيتو عمره زتر من 1500 وبيت صوبانو هاويلة بلكي 1000 مدت كذعينة كالي كوثن هيدي وعامو أتشاتو خدمرو إلان وعامو آثي غالبة من دول مشحلفة من فرنسا من أستراليا من أمريكا من كندا من ألمانيا ملفونو شابو طلاي من بولن ملفونو ميخائيل عبد الله وغير نوشي بحنوني قتون هركي قد سيمي مملة هركي خدكو حوزيتو وبيت صوبانو مدت كدعينا زترمي تمونيمو تشاعمو الفوشني اعتيقو يو وحكو حوزي مكوير سيدويتو من كل مدي يعني حكو حوزي ومكتب زبنو بروفيسور جيفري خان من كامبريدج هركي إيفا صدا تكتيو يا لحثونيثو علو موسيقى سوريو كلاسيك إشاتو تشاف هستسمى إلى مملو غالبا انترسانت كحزيت لهي أيكم جغلو عم جيفري خان أتشات ستكيتو لوليتا إيمانويل استي من أستراليا قد سيمو على عيني سبوثو مملو فإن حوريدا عبد المسيح برابروهم وغالبا غير فرسوف استمع فرنسا من دكوثم شحلفة هركنش كي حي أديومه
hecho adrede.
Me parece muy bien, pero esto
No, es que si no, no iban a hablar entre ellos.
ya, pero. Hola, sí. Oh, vale. Y plan. Cuidado, por favor.
Ja.
Hijas, pros, do you speak English?
Keine Sorge, wir machen es ja. Kannst du auf Deutsch, Englisch, Surd und was
Quien quiere que salga el audio,
was willst du auf Deutsch oder? Aber es auf Englisch. Nee? Noch Kübet, noch Basmane. Hey, hey. Wir haben das öfters gemacht. Ja? Ja. Okay. Best, Gete, dann schreib die Fragen auf, bitte. Ja. Ist viel besser, ja. El coche está
Atrás.
en tu parque. Espérate que te mando su...
Me tienes que decir a dónde tengo que ir y todo, a qué terminal y eso.
Sí. Miras, yo creo que llegan a la terminal 4. Estoy atacado.
Pues no es eso, y menos tú. Si fuera otro con menos experiencia, me cago.
No, con tantas cosas uno solo.
¿Hay un adaptador para esto?
Estos son gilipollas.
Ok, ¿cuánto tiempo? Así, 1 hour. No, either for this afternoon or maybe tomorrow. If it's, si podría ser, aunque porque si después de comer no nos mejor, nosotros estaremos aquí hasta la 1:30, 2 menos cuarto. Y si no, por la tarde a partir de las 4, cuando tú puedas. Pues sería perfecto.
Mira a ver si te ha llegado. Miras en internet el TK, que es Turkish Airlines, y la referencia te dice, yo creo que es en la T1, pero no me hagas caso. No, los Turkish, míralo en internet. Sí, pero se llama... escríbelo. Nora Lassi.
Pues es que Luis creía que teníamos la llave de esta. Yo pensaba que
Le escribes en una hoja de DIN A4 y ya está. Si quieres, llévate una carpeta de estas contigo, ¿vale?
Nada, ¿dónde los dejo?
¿Cómo?
¿Dónde los dejo?
Los traes al hotel Las Claras. ¿De acuerdo?
Voy a de tu casa.
Sí, el Eurostar Las Claras, en Marquesa Marta o calle.
Pero la que va a dar a Gran Vía, abajo.
Sí, pasas por los dominicos, das la vuelta y... De acuerdo, gracias. ¿Qué pasa? Ah, bueno. ¿Qué susto te he dado? A ver. Ahora a partir lo has grabado, ¿verdad? Tranquila, no te pongas nerviosa y ya está. Le va a salir muy bien.
Einige der Fragen. Also zum Beispiel, welche Bedingungen gibt es für Studium?
Jetzt, wir
Ja?
machen das später,
Ja?
denn ich muss
Okay.
jetzt
Ach
gleich.
so, soll ich dir die Fragen schicken?
Ja,
damit
bitte.
du dich auch
Ja,
vorbereiten
wunderbar,
kannst?
ja. Luego lo. Yo te diré, profesor, déjate de bobadas. الو شمخ البسيمة البطرة. اوكي. Jeff, افرق.
When I show you presentation,
But in order to present you and then
Does that microphone work? Because I have to stand here to see it, I think. Oh no, I'm able to do it. I can probably do it.
or do you want to sit here? It's better for you, or?
you were sitting there, or you are sitting here, but you can show
can see
your
it there.
presentation there.
Oh, I can
So
see
you
it
can-
here.
Oh, yeah.
All right, okay.
Okay,
Right.
but when you
Ponle, ahora en la.
uh,
Okay.
first you present
Yeah,
the speaker, and then I show the presentation. Okay.
Okay, perfect. He's well known, so he doesn't need any. Okay, thank you again. Now we are going to start with our first speaker. Honestly, Professor Jeffrey Khan doesn't need any presentation, but we have to accomplish with the formalities. Do you hear me well there behind? شموتيني بالسيمة? Well, just in relation to a very short explanation of his bio, Jeffrey Khan has been PhD School of Oriental and African Studies in London in 1984. He is, of course, Regius Professor of Hebrew at the University of Cambridge. His research publications, which are he has mentioned only few of them, focus on three main fields: biblical Hebrew language, especially medieval traditions, modern or Neo-Aramaic dialectology, and medieval Arabic documents. He is the general editor of the Encyclopedia of Hebrew Language and Linguistic. Last book was of 2013, and is the senior editor of Journal of Semitic Studies. His recent publications include the Tiberian pronunciation tradition of biblical Hebrew, which I'm somehow using as reference, that has been published in Cambridge at the university, and Open Book publishes in 2020. Performance of Sacred Semitic Texts, editor was co-editor Hindi Naiman. DC Discoveries 29 April 2020. As you know, he never stops. He's always working, publishing, producing, and it's a huge not only human resource but also source for the Semitic languages especially. I could continue telling about Professor Jeffrey Khan probably for the whole hour, and it wouldn't be sufficient. But we are going to use the time to listen to him talking about one of the important topics that is related to our first panel, which is the language. His presentation will be the classification of the modern Assyrian Neo-Aramaic dialects. You know, he is probably the best, not one of the best experts in this field. And this is why I'm really happy and grateful that he has taken his time and to share this while with us, because such works are needed in order to keep alive this rich branch of dialects that we have. And as I told you, I could be talking about many works, but there is an anecdote. When we first met, he came to me. It was in Girona, in Barcelona, and he started talking to me in Surat. Make it Ibi Bakr Khamka Bakriyata Minno. I said, "Who are you?" And then I came to know that it was the Professor Jeffrey Khan. He was recording even the dialect of Herbole. and he did even an excellent work about that. So I'm really grateful to you to come and to share your wisdom, your knowledge in this field, and also especially to have the chance that you share with us such a huge experience of knowledge is for all of us a huge honor and profitable occasion. I'm not going to take more time. You have at about 35 minutes, and then we will have some few questions. The role is yours. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Ephraim. Well, I like to say how happy I am to be here. It is wonderful, well, to see Ephraim again, but also to meet many old friends and to meet new people here many of whom I've heard about, and really just to immerse myself in your language, because your language is very close to my heart for many years, and so I'm going to today, within the time I have, I want to give a sort of rather general overview which somehow reflects some of the things I've been doing over the last 25, 30 years. I want to give you some general idea about the historical background of the modern spoken dialects of Assyrian, and to explain, perhaps answer the question already I've been asked, what shall I call my language, Assyrian or Aramaic? I want to try and explain how I see the situation. And I think you have to really look at a much broader context to understand history and culture and roots. So, okay, I better turn this on a bit. There we are. So, there are a variety of what I call Aramaic-speaking peoples in Mesopotamian area in modern times, I want to talk about how Aramaic, as the term, relates to the language, the dialects that most people in this room speak, and what names they should be given, etc., etc. But Aramaic was a Semitic language which has ancient roots. It first attested about 1000 BC in inscriptions, and certainly in the so-called Achaemenid period, about 500 or the last half of the first millennium BCE, it was spoken very widely in the Middle East, and it was an official language of the Persian Empire. And this is some of the earliest inscriptions, and here are some ancient documents, and in various texts and manuscripts. I probably won't dwell on these because that's not the main subject of my lecture, but only to show that Aramaic as a language has been attested in ancient time. But one thing that some of these ancient documents show is that Aramaic is actually not really a language. It is a family of languages, and it's really comparable to what we in Indo-European studies is called Germanic. I like to or Romance languages. So just like in Germanic is a family, it's a group of languages which include English, German, Swedish, Norwegian, Danish, etc. Aramaic can be compared to that Germanic. Within Germanic, within Aramaic, there are lots of different languages, and that's, I think, an important point to understand. So these Aramaic languages have survived in modern times in 4 main areas or islands, namely.
If you want to point, you can do it as well.
Okay, right, thank you. They've survived in what's sometimes called Central Neo-Aramaic. I know that's not the normal, that some people don't like that term, but that's basically Tur-Abdin area. Northeastern Neo-Aramaic, or Nina, that is the dialect spoken east of the Tigris River. Neo-Mandaic, that is spoken in southwestern Iran. and Western Neo-Aramaic, which is spoken in Syria. Now here we show those various islands of spoken Aramaic on the map here. Now the boundary between, as you see, between Tur-Abdin or Süryye or Surayt and Nina, northeastern Aramaic, is the Tigris River. And this was actually not only a geographical boundary, and more importantly, historically, this was a historical boundary between the Eastern Roman and Persian empires in late antiquity, and also the boundary between Syrian-Orthodoxy of Tur-Abdin and what was called the Nestorian Church, also called now, of course, the Assyrian Church of the East of the ex-Sasanian land. So that boundary of the Tigris, I think, is the fact that we have the historical and religious division is probably more significant for explaining why we have different language groups. Now, just to give some idea of some of the distinctions between Tur-Abdin and the Nina dialects, if you met somebody in Nina, you would say Shlama, but if you met somebody in Tur-Abdin, you'd say Shlomo. But we do have this kind of transition area in the Beth-Nahrin region of Nina. This is in the far northwest of the Nina area, where in Beth-Nahrin you'd say Shloma, which is a sort of if you like, a hybrid between the two. Now, the very important fact of the Nina group is that we have a division between Christian dialects and Jewish dialects, because these dialects were spoken by Christian communities and Jewish communities, and and then the Christian communities. I'll just give you here an example of how different these dialects are. So they're so different, but they are related. So one can say that they are different to the extent that they are mutually incomprehensible to some extent, and so one can claim that they are both speaking separate languages in a way, but they are very, very closely related. So, for example, in Süryaniler, the Christians would say Besa for house, whereas the Jews would say Bela. So we had Jews and Christians living side by side in Süryaniler, and they would have a very different way of pronouncing things. So Ida, the Christians of Süryaniler would say Ida for hand, but the Jews would say Ilah. And I won't perhaps go through all the rest of those different constructions, different examples, but only to show that we've got a very different type of differences across the whole of the language, ranging from the phonology, morphology, and also syntax. So here is a map showing the Nina dialect area, and we've got probably, all of you will obviously be familiar with this area, but only just to remind you that, if I can get that, sorry, I should be pointing here, shouldn't I? No, don't want to point at you. Yeah, so here we have, it's basically the dialects, so all the dialects east of the Tigris here, which is now northern Iraq and southeastern Turkey, and then along the western area of Iran. Now, in modern times, there were Jews and Christians speaking these dialects. The Christians in Iran really were mainly in the north, Salamas and Urmi. There was a small community in Sanandaj, but there were Jews speaking the language, a form of Nina, up in Salamas, Urmi, and all the way down these villages in western Iran. Sakaz, all the way down to Kerend in the south. So now, if we look at the Christian dialects, they can be classified into basically, the way I see it, at least 3 major subgroups, and these are marked here on the map with different symbols. They consist essentially of those dialects on the Mosul plain, which are marked with the IC1, I call it here, Iraq Christian 1. And then, though, I don't want to put this in anybody's eyes, I don't point it at Ephraim by mistake. Can I lift this up, actually? You can hear me. Make sure I'm being heard. So, and there, the next group of the dialects spoken here, essentially in the Dahok province here in the north. And then the third group of dialects are spoken further down in Süryaniler and Erbil provinces down here. This is IC3. There is a certain amount of, I think I've got the next slide. Well, okay, we'll look up. The Jewish dialects have a clear division between those dialects spoken north of the Zab River, called Richness, which means our language in these Jewish dialects, and those dialects spoken east of the Zab River, called Trans-Zab. All of this area here. Now, the Jewish dialects are, as I say, there's a certain if you compare the context of these various subgroups, you can see how they correspond to divisions in other languages in the area. For example, the Jewish dialects in Lishan-Adeni would correspond to the area where northern Kurdish, Kurmanji, is spoken, and the Trans-Zab Jewish dialects correspond to the areas in which central Kurdish, Sorani, is spoken. Now, the three Christian groups really correspond broadly to areas where Arabic is the dominant external language, we could call it. And then the Iraqi Christian 2, that is up in the northern Dahok province, that essentially corresponds to the area where Kurmanji Kurdish is spoken. And Iraq 3, those are the dialects which correspond to the area where Sorani is spoken. That's central Kurdish. So that does seem to have had an impact on on the differences between these various groups. Now, also within the Christian dialects, there's some degree of linguistic alignment corresponding to the ecclesiastical affiliation of the communities. So those in the north, that is the Dahok provinces, are predominantly spoken by members of the Assyrian Church of the East, whereas those in the Süryaniler and Erbil provinces are predominantly spoken by Chaldean Church, people as Christians of affiliation to the Chaldean Church, and those in the Mosul Plain. Some of them, in particular Karakosh, are spoken by members of the Syrian Catholic Church. So both substrate, i.e. languages spoken in the area, and also ecclesiastical affiliation have an impact on the formation of differences of these different dialects. And of course also religion, Christianity versus Judaism, all of these factors ultimately have an influence on the formation of differences between these dialects. Now, I'll be concentrating probably the most of them. Well, let's focus now specifically on the Christian dialects. Now, one thing you find when you work on the dialectology of the Christian dialects, you see this incredible diversity. So here is just a very few examples of how the word for house in the Christian dialects. Well, actually, I've got more than Christian. I've got some of the Jewish dialects. C means Christian and J means Jewish. So you say Baithar is the original form in the earlier Aramaic, but Gramun preserves this form, Baithar, very archaically. But then you get all these variants across various dialects: Betha, Beta, Besa, Besha, Belah, Beya, Bia. Now, the point is that this diversity it shows you something very important. It shows us how ancient this language is. Because when you have linguistic diversity, it shows that the language is very ancient. I always say to people, it's like England, we have lots of dialects. I mean, unfortunately, a lot of them are dying out now, but historically, until the last 50 years at least, there were many, many very distinct dialects of English. Whereas you went to the USA, you really essentially have some differences in pronunciation, but you really don't have different dialects of English. So this shows you that in England, English is a much more ancient language of the country. So that's basically, diversity shows you some reflection of antiquity. And here we have incredible, this is just a shot of the villages of the Hakkari region, which shows you how many villages there were, of course, speaking the various forms of Nina. And most of these places have different dialects. So we have great diversity. And here, just in the Urmi area, even in Urmi itself, which has been a very prominent language in the literary form of the language, the actual spoken dialects, certainly 100 years ago, when the Christians were in the various villages, there are nearly 200 villages in the Urmi plain, there were slight differences between many of these villages. Certainly in the north of the Urmi plain, they had a slightly different way of speaking from the south. And then if you go further up into Salamanca, you have a very different kind of dialect. So you have a lot of diversity. Now, what's the historical background of the various dialects? Now, the point is that the actual written forms of modern Assyrian or the modern forms of Nina really only started being written down in the Ottoman period, around the 17th century, in some of the earliest manuscripts. However, there are various sources that attest to the use of these dialects at a much earlier period. Bar Hebreus, for example, mentions historical forms of Nina. He mentions this form Ka'athe, which is essentially Kathe in the modern dialects, at least some dialects, those in various parts of the Mosul plain, for example. So there are some very unexpected places. I found in a manuscript of a medieval physician actually here in Spain, in Zaragoza, called Ibn Baklarish. He wrote a Materia Medica text and which includes different in Arabic, but he gave the names of the medical cures, the medical various sorts of medications in different languages. And one of them, here, it says, he's talking about the Laban an-Nisa, which means the language, the milk of women, which is regarded as a cure. It says in Süryaniler Bachta. So he says the milk of women, the word women in Süryaniler are known as Bachta. Now Bachta is a Nina word, as you all know, and it's really unique to Nina. So it must have come from Nina, and essentially this, in Baklari, somehow he was drawing on a source, presumably from medical traditions in Iraq, where somebody had done some fieldwork, or perhaps there was a Nina-speaking doctor in medieval Iraq. We're talking about the 11th century, where the word Bachta was being used for women. Now, Now, the Nina dialects have been in contact with lots of languages over the centuries, and these include Kurdish, Gurani, which is another Iranian language, Armenian, Arabic, Turkic, Persian, and in fact, there are many languages spoken in Western Asia, and so the Nina dialects have been in contact with these languages for many centuries. And they have had various effects on the language. Some cases they've actually helped preserve the language, like in Karakosh, the pronunciation of so-called th, or the interdentals, has been preserved due to contact with, it seems, Maslawi Arabic, where they have interdentals th and the. Whereas in other dialects further east, such as Urmi, there is the interdentals have shifted to ta. Now, in Urmi, there are a number of influences from Armenian, it seems. Like we have these things called unaspirated voiceless stops, ba, which is a feature, bida, for example, or tilpa in your eyelash. That apparently ultimately has developed under the influence of Eastern Armenian. Now, interestingly, the Christian Urmi has unaspirated stops. So they say bida, tilpa, for example. But Jewish Urmi has no unaspirated stops. So, because you remember that Christian and Jewish dialects are typically very different, although spoken in the same area. Now, this gives us some insight into historical background. So this shows that the Jews of Urmi migrated from the south, whereas it seems the Christians of Urmi migrated from the north. And the blue line there shows what I would reconstruct as the line of migration of the Christians. And they were coming essentially from the Hakkari, from the mountains, whereas the Jews seem to have come from the south, possibly from eastern Iraq. Now, also another insight into migration is the fact that we sometimes find loan words in some of these Nina dialects which are not in the immediate contact languages. And for example, down in Sanandaj, it's possible to find loan words which are not Semitic or Aramaic in background, but nor are they the local Sanandaj Kurdish, like the word for cradle, beshka, in Sanandaj Kurdish. Instead, the Jews and Christians say dargushta, which it does happen to be found in a Kurdish dialect, but in further north, Bahdini, which is Kurmanji. So it suggests that there is a move, possibly the migration of the Jews and also Christians to some extent from Iraq to Sanandaj. I mean, it's pretty obvious they did come from Iraq at some point, but this suggests that perhaps they came from further north in Iraq. So things like this can give us some insight into the history of migrations, because we have very little written history about these communities. Now, an important point when you're looking about languages in contact is the fact that we have to take into account that the languages in contact changed over the period of history. For example, the contact now with modern Central Kurdish, known as Sorani, is really only a recent phenomenon. If you go back over 100 years, the main contact language in this area where Sorani is spoken, you had another Iranian language called Gorani. And now in the Urmi region, Turkic is the main contact language, but if you go back further in history, Kurdish was the main contact language. Now, the same thing applies if you go back further in history, although the Iranian languages are, like Kurdish, Gorani, have been more and more recent years the main contact language. If you go back even further, Akkadian was the main contact language with the Nina dialects. Now, so we have a sort of these series of language shifts in the language of contact. Now this is an important point for understanding the history of the Nina dialects. Now, the Akkadian substrate, and I know a lot of you will be interested to know, we have signs of it in some of the dialects through loan words. Many of these are loan words relating to agriculture or to everyday life. For example, in Karakosh, you have words like bakhshime, which means a storeroom for grain in the roof, which seems to come from Akkadian bit khashimi. Rakhisa means a pile of straw in it, and this comes from Akkadian rakhitsu. And billa, which is a word used in the Mosul plain for an external door or gate, this appears to come from abulu in Akkadian. So these are signs of the fact that the dialect spoken by the modern Assyrians is not a direct descendant of Akkadian. However, it's a direct descendant, it would seem, of Aramaic dialect spoken by the ancient Assyrians, who also spoke Akkadian. So there was a sort of language contact in the ancient world during the still when Akkadian was alive, and this influenced Aramaic, and then when there was Akkadian ceased to be spoken, this influence of Akkadian remained in the dialects. Also in Barwar, for example, they talk about when they grow rice, they grow it in a mishara, which also is Akkadian word. So, and we have influence, it seems, of Akkadian morphology on Nina, like these infinitive forms like katala, katole. I mean, some of this vocalic structure of the infinitives in Nina dialects seems to have, possibly due to an Akkadian substrate. And now an interesting feature, if you look comparing Christian and Jewish dialects, is that Jewish dialects, when they are influenced by another contact language, they typically converge more than the Christian dialects with the contact languages. And this is probably because the Jews dwelt in towns, and they were small traders, and they had very intense contact with the urban population or who were speaking Iranian languages, whereas the Christians typically lived in villages, were agriculturalists. Also they probably from different migrations. I mean, like the Christians in towns, named more recent towns such as Urmi, originally came from villages. So that probably explains also why there's a difference between the dialects. But the most powerful factor that brings about linguistic differences between Christians and Jews was social, and because what really influences the change in language is social networks. So Christians and Jews had completely different social networks, and I mean, these social networks can extend over considerable distances. For example, in Barwar, if you go up into the north of Iraq, you'll find a series of Jewish dialects, which are no longer spoken there, I should say, but we'll finally talk about that as we get to the end. We had villages like Beth-Nahrin up in Barwar, Ahmedia, Nerwa. All the Jewish dialects of that area, although these are towns or villages separated by quite a long distances. I mean, it takes quite a long time, even in a car nowadays, to travel between the two, but they had very tight social networks, and therefore their dialects are very, very similar, almost the same, whereas the contact language, the Barwar, which is spoken by Christians, is quite different. So this what is also interesting is that the Nina dialect shows some signs of social contact between Christians and Jewish communities, and this is reflected by convergence between Christian and Jewish dialects in the same region. So if you look at the Christians of Koisenjak and Jews, they have this particle la to express progressive. He is drinking, la shate. It's not the negator, doesn't mean he doesn't drink. This is what they say. Whereas in the Barwar, and Christians would say holeshtaya, he is drinking, and Jews would say ileshtaya, which is something very similar. So the point is that although there are differences between Christian and Jewish dialects, in the same area there's some degree of convergence between the two. And this seems to reflect, this can be interpreted as representing historic, social contact and between the two communities. So here's Barwar, the west I visited quite recently. Here's Beth-Nahrin, this village just next to Nune and Dura in Barwar. Now, when Jews and Christians used to live as neighbours, and they refer to each other as qariwa. That means very close one, in other words, a kinsman. And this itself reflects this affectionate the sort of relationship. But so there was a lot of, when I worked with the Christians of Barwar, they often told me how as children they would run across the fields and sit at the feet of the rabbi in Beth-Nahrin to listen to children's stories, and they had a lot of social contact. But the Jews still, they had a secret language as well, which meant that they sometimes used this when they didn't want the Christians to understand everything. So although there was social convergence reflected in their dialects, there was also an attempt to maintain the demarcations of the communities. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is the endangerment of the Nina dialects. Now, as you all know, after the genocides in 1915, we had this terrible tragedy, and some of the well, I won't tell you, we all know the story, the tragic story of the Syrian people, but only to say that there was lots of recycling of this displacements. In the 1970s, we had the Anfal campaign. This is a picture in Arbole, and then we, of course, we had in 2015 this terrible destruction of ISIS. We've got all this refugee crisis. So we've had a series of tragedies, and the Christian population of Iraq has been vastly reduced. I say it's now estimated to be reduced down from 1.4 million in 2003 to 250,000. And that number is probably reduced since I made this slide, actually, because the Christians are leaving all the time. So this means that there are many of these dialects are highly endangered now. One such dialect, for example, is dialect of Bidyal, which is a small village right in the north of Iraq, north of Diana, or Suran, which I visited in 2017. I met 3 families there, and I met, well, one of the most competent speakers was a man called Sargis Sliwo, who tragically died of COVID. So after ISIS came COVID, and COVID killed off, tragically, a lot of the final good speakers of some of these dialects. So here's Sargis Sliwo. I may be able to hear him. Oh, sorry. I don't seem to get the audio. I had some audio earlier, but for some reason it won't play now. But anyhow. Well, you can hear the audio. Here's another storyteller I met in 2019 from Manimatha in Nala, TRI. He was one of the final storytellers in the village at the time. Unfortunately, well, we don't have time to listen to the audio anyhow. But and then the Jews left in the 1950s, and those of Iran left after the Iranian Revolution, so that all because of this displacement, either through violence or through, I mean, the Jews are a different story really, but we're talking about mainly the Christians. We're in a major state of high endangerment, and therefore it is. Sorry, I can't seem to move it now. Can you move it? It doesn't seem to move.
No, please hold on.
It's not moving.
No.
After you admitted somebody just now, it doesn't move.
Wait just a second.
Yes, but I don't know why. Okay, I will exit.
Yeah. Sometimes when you admit somebody, somebody doesn't move. Just nearly the end. Nearly the end. Keep going, yeah. Keep going. Yeah, but here, there, that documentation. There. Yeah, so, okay. So this is why it's very important to do documentation of these languages. And that's what I've been devoting myself to for the last sort of 25, 30 years. Here's a picture of me actually in Georgia, where there's a community. Well, that's we got some audio there. That was a speaker I met in Camden, Georgia. Another thing is that, and finally, really, what to say is, apart from documentation, which I've been devoting myself to for the last 30 years, and writing grammars to preserve the language, I've also been very active recently, in particular, the last sort of decade, really, trying to educate young people. I've had a series of PhD students, of course, in Cambridge, but I've also we've run workshops in Iraq with the young native speakers, educating and helping them, explaining how to undergo a documentation of their own languages. And this is just some shots of workshops we did in Arbil and in Dohok. and sorry, what's happened? Yeah. Because I only got one slide, very important one, at the very end. Yeah. The very last slide. Yeah. Well, okay, if you'd started from there, so these are pictures of the workshops, and then, because I always say to people in these workshops and when I give talks that your heritage is in your mouth. It's not in statues, it's not in ancient inscriptions, it's in your mouth. And therefore, it's very important to document these languages before, while they're still spoken. Thank you very much.
Well, dear Professor Jeffrey Khan, thank you very much, as usual, for your excellent presentation. We have a few minutes for a few questions in relation to the conference. I'm sure that there will be much more questions, but we have just a few minutes. And then, yeah, please, Dr. Nicholas.
Okay, I have a comment and a question. It's very interesting.
Wait, take the microphone, please. نشرب خط العلم.
Okay, I have a comment and a question. Okay, so
Just.
Okay, no, it's not working. Hello, okay. So I have a comment and a question. My comment is, it's very interesting that you mentioned that the Jews are better. It's not working. I'll use my voice, I'll project. It's interesting that you mentioned the Jews of Beth-Nahrin had a hidden language. It's something that's very common as well, I found, in Christians from Umrah. So the village of Umrah, which is near Jazeera in the Botan area in Turkey, they also had a hidden language. When I was interviewing some people from Umrah, they told me whenever we were with Kurds, we didn't use words that we knew were loan words from Kurdish. We would use pure Syriac words. So, for example, they wouldn't say shahr for city, they would say medita. Or they would say, for example, instead of paraye, they would say zuze. Or instead of saying kochikta, they would say matanta. So they would use pure Syriac words instead of the loan words so that the Kurdish neighbors wouldn't understand what they were talking about. It's very interesting that you mentioned the Jews from Beth-Nahrin had that because, well, I understood a couple of the words. So for example, lamhabet is very close to Tchuma dialect. They say lahabet. They use the word harbat or barhawa. And the word cho'e, or like zuze, chua, something like slippery, something, something shiny, slippery. That's sort of, how much would the Christian neighbors of the Jews, because if I could understand a couple of those words, how much would the Christian neighbors of those Jews from Beth-Nahrin have been able to understand their hidden language? Was it used to hide what they were saying from the Christian neighbors, or was it used to hide what they were saying from Muslim neighbors that would have understood some of the words that they were using?
Nicholas, some very important points you're making. I'd always assumed, that since the very fact they're speaking a Nina dialect would mean that would be enough to make it difficult for Kurdish-speaking neighbours to understand them. But I always assumed that the secret language was primarily designed to ensure that they were not understood by the Christians, because and it's really what I was trying to explain was that they clearly did have they had some degree of social closeness, as reflected in use of the word qariwa in particular. But to maintain their own sort of community identity, they needed some kind of tools to give a barrier. And this is, very common in communal dialectology. But yeah, and I didn't know about Umrah. Thank you for telling me about it. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Is there another question? Probably the last one.
Thank you very much. Does it work?
It might be working. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you very much. My question is more related to history of this dialect. You indicated in one of your early slides that Tigris was an imitation line between East and West dialects. So prior to World War I, there were a lot of Eastern Assyrians in the in Mardin, originating from the Church of the East, which then converted to the Catholic Church. So what dialect were they speaking, and how were their interactions with the Jacobite side, who were speaking probably the Western side? I don't know. So is there any research in this area?
Well, I think Shabo Atala is probably more qualified to answer that question. I mean, just briefly, I would simply say that there clearly, obviously, have been some migrations. There have been. It wasn't. There has not completely sealed boundary between Tigris, and there are signs of some degree. I mean, actually, just as I showed between in Balwa, between the Beth-Nahrin, the Jewish dialect, and the Christian dialect of Balwa, there are differences, but there's some degree of convergence. And that shows some degree of contact, but with some barrier. Now, one could argue, I mean, I think this is what Shaba's going to talk about anyhow, that there is some degree of convergence between particularly the dialects of the far west of the Nineveh area and the sort of the dialects of Suryoye, Suryoye. In fact, it's interesting you find a number of shared features between dialects of the Mosul plain, such as Karakosh, which is Syrian-Orthodoxe, and some of the features of Suryoye. So all of that shows that we're not dealing with such a clear-cut division. There must have been historically some kind of contact, some kind of migrations, but of a lower level. I think perhaps I'll just leave it like that. All I can say, I think Shabo is going to address this very question in his lecture, if I'm not mistaken. Thank you.
Good. Thank you very much. The last question, please, just questions, because we are on time, but I don't like to be late for the next session. Robin Elahi?
It's very, very short. In the beginning of the lecture, you said that by the end of the lecture, we would know what to call our language. But you didn't say what we're supposed to call it now, Assyrian or Arabic?
Well, I was trying to explain. First of all, I believe the name of the language is not up to me as a scholar. It's up to the people who speak the language just to name it what they feel they want to name it. And that is associated with what the kind of sense of identity you have, with your communal identity. And your name of the language you give it reflects your communal identity. It's not me as a scholar to tell you what to name it. I was only trying to explain the complex history of the language and its relationship to other languages of the area, and really what this word Aramaic means. I know a lot of Assyrians get upset about the idea that that you might be said you're speaking Aramaic. That it's really, I like to say, it's a bit like people saying to me, "You speak Germanic." I said, "Look, I'm not German." But in fact, Germanic is not a language. Germanic is a sort of like a family of languages. So that's what I think. I believe you can regard Aramaic as a sort of an ancient family of languages, from which develop various languages, and I was trying to explain how communal identity is so important for forming a language. And so with the Syrian Church of the East, the Syrian peoples, they formed a very distinctive form of language, and so that's different from all the other descendants of Aramaic, and therefore it should be called something different. And Assyrianism is a very appropriate term for if you identify yourself as an Assyrian. But also trying to say that, it's also very ancient. And it does have, there's evidence of contact with Akkadian, show that it has roots in ancient Akkadian. But it's not Akkadian, it's not a direct descendant of Akkadian, it just had ancient roots in Akkadian. So essentially, and the name of a language reflects your community identity, and there's no right or wrong way of doing it. The right way is for the people of speaking who feel themselves to be Assyrian to use the word Assyrian. If you feel yourself to be something else, you used your way different language. I mean, I feel I'm English, I call it English. I mean, it's the reflection of your community identity and who you feel you are. I don't know if that's an appropriate response, but I'm happy to talk further about it. But.
Thank you very much. We could discuss about this topic, but it will take time. I'm thankful to you again, and now we are going to jump to the next session. And thank you again, Professor Jeffrey Khan. Thank you. Sí, no te preocupes. Du setzt dich hin und ich werde mit euch dabei sein, damit was ist. Hast du von irgendwas die Noten genommen? Brauchst du eine Noten oder? Achso, ich habe genommen. Wunderbar. أنا بزي الوضع تمام. تعطلوا كم تقدر. Okay. Gut, ich lasse euch alleine, ich gehe mit.
Du bist frei. Ja. Okay.
Hast du wunderbar.
والله بطلع منه فجاك المكان الأصفر لا راح أقول ودك مشغل ولا هي مشغل أوكي
سمعنا فيك سقطا هذا وهيك أنت ما جافري من مدينة
بريخ صفرو يعني أنا بتعمل بصو بريخ صفرو ليه بقى داخل مايك بريخ صفرو ميجابست بريخ صفرو الكل يخو يقرو بروفيسور أفرم طلب لمني تونو دابرنو إي توتاثو وترجمو دقدوثي طلب لي مني يقروتت بروفيسور أبرم أنا مدبرن أيا توتا أو ترجمة خورا سمير خوشابة. So I have to continue now as the chair of this conference given by our friend and colleague Samir Khoshaba. I will do my best to keep with the time and also to introduce him very shortly. The language will be, of course, it's a question of how to do it, so I'll try to shift into modern Assyrian, so into his dialect. That's why I think everybody will understand something instead of continuing in English, otherwise it will be a mixture. So من هتخا ماري بتمهم زمن أنا صورة لين خورا ترجمة بتاعي بالصورة أنا رابع خديون ديون تيو أخا من خورا سمير خوشابة بتمهمزم بتخمندي رابع أنقايا رابع الصايلة قا يلبانا قا مش مطورانوتا دلشانة ديان لأن أو خانا شم تخمونة لب تمل ولب إديو تخمونة لب قدمة يعني أول شانة دخ ماسخ مطورخلة ومتورخله إن بارخ خبرانة ملي خاتي نيولوجيزمز خبرانة خاتي قا مبلخخلي بليشانا يومايا أول بلخانة دي بس أمندي بش بالكقالي بش مهميلي وخورا إلي من خابر أنا دياذيلي يذن وأنا بلخلي رابع بت قومتوات تخابر وبلخانة يلبانا يدودلي أني قوري إيوا بت لعزة دي انت خابر وأوا ليش لعزة بش قوية كسلي إيوا لعزة دي تقاني دهلمون لأن أو بني هلمون إلي بروفيسور جيفري متخرر لوخن جيرامون أوا هلمون وجيرامون خالعزة لأني لي دمي بيثا أنا لي دمي بيثا وهلمناي لي فرابا خديون تبقت بيوخ ميقرأ ملبانا سمير إلي خام ملبانا ميكانيكال انجينيرينج يعني بصورة ليذن من أمرن بس ميكانيكال انجينيرينج جو خابت صوبا خا مدرسة الليتا جو مديتا دفكخو جو سويدن وجو بلخانة ليلة لشانايا بلخانة لتكنيكايا أخذ برملي يعني توارد التكنولوجيا ليلة توارد لشانة بس أوا مخكول عندي وخ أخا أو رابع منا ديني أخا تخموني لي توارا لبس تكنيكايا أو لشانايا لشانة دي أو مندي خا مندي رابع سبايلة دي توادا وتاما من رابشن إما البانيلي دبرانا ليجو بالصوبة دي يعني شولاني رابا ودلي بس أخنا أديا بليقوتا بايخ تشمخ كمالة لومادا أو دمحكيتا دويالي قم خشتا تاما مشوريلي وأديا متمومي جوخا جغلا يعني ورابا خدية وخدت مهمزومي but transmissions in different machines as an example of development of the Assyrian language in the field of mechanical engineering. فقط اتلخ بلقصات
بسيمة رابا
بش قصة من بلقصات اوكي مشينا
بسيمة رابا ملبانية قيرة بطلب منه ما تخرت لي إسرا دقيقة قمدانا مدت لي إيمان تأوري إسري دقيقة
أوكي.
سببت لي من ديانة الخرطة مملي أن قاينا يقيراثة ويقيرة ملبانياثة وملبانيا خدوتي ويقاري رابا جوري لتفاق بيا وخون ومتخر ملبانا خبيوة بدما قروة خامملا جو خقلا دمخاروثة ميكانيكيثة ميكانيكال انجينيرينج لمخاروثة ميكانيكيثة وآنت لي رابا خبا قليشانا وكتت إلى خقلا ديولباني من هذا خبلا خي والجاري. Can you please show the slides? مغدوغ زايقة كناية ممرة يعني مملة إلى شو داري جو الساني بريشة خاطوسة مفطورانوثة لشانة ثرايا يخقلا مخاروثة ميكانيكيثة من باردة جاهر جودو ممرة بجودة ممرتة يعني مملة بالدرشخ على شو داري ماين شو داري وما أتشت شو داري إتلان بس شو رايا شو قلنت دمخيخ بت الصايوثة دمفطورانوثة لشانة I have it's not moving how can I okay because okay thank you okay كد يدخ وما قدرش لنجو داو لو ماذا قام هاي كرسي نينوى كد كل اللي شانه بوارن جو شخلابة عم زونا واللي شانه آثورا ليش نيزا اللي شانه كل اللي شانه سنيقة المفطورانوثا ومشخلوبة عم زونا كت برناشا مدام الزونا بوارن ثاين يبالغ خاثة ثاين الشخلابة خاثة جو خيوثة برناشا وبريشايث أن تري دار خراية رابا وينه من ديانة خاثة جو جغلت توقانة جو دخلت سمانة وشركة من هذا شخلابة رابع نبي وايا شتا إيث كتوايا خشخاتا خاثيخ شيلة وبيوارن جولك سوقونة وبياشان مبلخ جو مدرشياتها وجو يداعي وأبخنان مدمارة سنيقة وقد أخنان آطورا مفتورخ لليشانان قد ماصغ جوجخ عمدار وخامن دي خينا أخنان آطوراي بلا برشتا مناشي خينا تتنا أطرا وتيوين بشوباي كت أخنا نويرو جو عوقاني قشية ومشونية وخ من دكثة لدكثة من طورة لدشتا من أطرة لأطرة ومن ياوشتا لياوشتا من هذا ليلة هر أول شوناية جوزاونا بس باي لشوناية دكثة من هذا خنا بش اتلنسني قوثا معمي خينة قد بارخ وخشلخ خشخاتا خاتي جو ليشانان قد بنونا مغبيلة ليشانان بنونا لتنا أنخش خاثة سنيقين دما بالخينة جو دو مغدورة دينا بخاي جاوي الرابع أسقب تويا زرايتة خبا جو ليشانة بنونا قطوسة جو طورانة هكاري اثوى إيلاني واثوى جلة اتواني شماني وناشية ديواني اخطوسة إيلانة عبصة إيوه وما بلطيواني قاب ديوثة كثوتا وإثوى سامرما قا جلة وقا خيواثة قا دواري وقا توري عبصة لخسني الخبراني إذ جو كونش من اللي ما صدارخ اللي خازخ لي من سنقر بس لخسني ما بالخخ لديو ولا سامرما وإيمان ثينة أطوراي هرآني دويوا من هكاري خشنا الخابر تاما ثوى جلا لبريشة من طورة قطوسة ثوى خارنوة وثوى باربخينة وشاركة إنا إديوم بنونا السوغة أطوراي إنا جو أطروات ماروا إتلن أن خشخاثة مارون بس لق سنيقي إلا إديوم إلا خام دي باصورة دينا بياشة جو مصواتة أطرا قطوسة أخنا بيواربخ يعني إيوه جو خام غدورة مليا من توقان بريشة قهذا خوالت هاوي لن خشخاثة دلخمي قدية خيوثة إيوه بخايا إن خير جو بثواثا قطوسة إتلن خامنيانة السانة وآمورة ديوخ مبلوخ اللي يوم إيث من ما قيرنت المجد اللنتا المسيانيثة الماويشانيثة سربنتة أوقع ومرة كلها نشمان خوطا تمني وإتلن ما ندنو قال أقدر رغتا وراديثا وقطارة وطيستا أخنا سنيقوخ أني خشخاثة هاويلا ولا هر أني خشخاثة بجانا أبهد دامي جودن توقاني والد هاويلا شمانق عليهن شماهق عليهن قد ماسخ مقدون مارا ما جوجخ لليشانا جو خيوتا خفتا قطوسا درشق على دايا مسيانيثا اغدي ادخ كلان مسيانيثا يمتخ لوش جاوا عم مدخيانه وما بالخخلة تاما بيت مدخيانه الوشتا إينا مفتخخلا أي مسيانيثا وجشق خلا بتخازغ أو شو بدخمته إلى الوشتا إلى ذا طوليثا وأي طوليثة بياشة لزعبتا بأورخا يعني مصعى يوثت خا مزيعانا برقايا وخا شودارة شي بقايا يعني أخنا إتلان خبراني ما صمتخنا هلو سوكالا أنا إنجليشايا ليشانا يوربناي ما صمتخنا وما بس والي إلا ما بالخخنا قطوسة بكرتا إلى أي بولي يمري لب إنجلس ينشي أخبره في شيء مو بالخمزونة إمبراطوروثة آطور كد ما بالخيوة بكرياثة عم خولة قما سقتد من دي ياقورة الذا راموثة يعني إتلان خشخاثة دين الرابع عتيقي وإتلان خشخاثة دين ضاراية دما بالخخنة إينا أخنا مغدون مارا سنيقة وخ اتكثوخنة مصلخنا جو كونش ملة قد ما صلنا بالخخنة قطوسة عند فبروني يمراتي طاري درغدا اتلان درغياتك كل يالن شورا وويل خا قطرة قطوسة جودا شودارة شيش الثايا ليه ما صبروني يمراتي مبرم لي بليشان آطورايا إلا داميرا قطوسة كسلان جو سويدا بليشان سويدايا جو أطروات خينا بليشان دواترا إينا أخني رغبة بشطة اتلان أني خشخاثة هر من دياشتا مباخلتا السرنا الجغلة كاكايا سبيلة خا جغلة وتلكاكي وشي شلتا دتوا من جغلة زعوبة الجغلة زعيبة ديلة هربو سرنا اذي جغلة دراديتا يعني غزايوتون اتلن خاليشانا رويخة وبسيمة شو رايا كبار خجمة خشخاتا هاويا قورة على الشمعة على الناتا إينا من مبلغتا بايش خامدي الرابع يادايا قطوسة آيلة كآمورة جو كلها بتواتن إلى الساند بزاعد إذا انت بدخخ لآمورة بتخازخ خا شودارة جرزايا افتري جرزة خامناي إلى صير بسرنا مزيعانا وخينا بسرنا شوبا أتوي أن بازوعي وأخا مشخلوبي اللي هل بديو كل داني شودارة مشادورة لشودارة مشادورة لعزيزوثا يعني سرها وخضارة إينا هرب أيدانا مخلوبة لمشخلوبة لسرها ودغضارتها سرها وخضارة لو سرهاوة ديلا طلبتها تاوي إيمان البث موديل سنيقة ناشا مغدميران شودارة بيشيمو بلخي قا مشانيثا مشادرة تعزيزوثا من خاسرنا الخاسرنا خينا وها ما جاهي هاوي أن سرني رقة مغدادة خاقا جاء قرب الغدادة من هذا أتشي بريشة شو داري قشو لي إلى مشادرتا تعزيزوثا قا مجوجت تخا يقرأ أنه يا مرمت تخا يقرأ يان مرخط تخا السانة ما تهاوي خامن من أتشي شو داري بدلاخم جو كل أكنا يوثا غدا أكنا يوثا بريشتايلا من داخلها إث السنة دين تخيلة على مالشمة خجال المغزايا أي text. Is that possible to remove this because it's hidden the text? What do you have this? You don't think so? Okay. أنا تخيلنا على الإسكيما يعني مغزايا كاكت جرزة بديا شيله دبنت كاكا بديا شيله دبنت كاكا خينا قد زايبله جو جرزة إن خير جو شيباقة مثيخة على البكرتا و خيلة باش مشونيا يان أي عزيزوثا مشونيا من بكرتا الشيباقة بأرخت خيلة دخكاكا friction force قهتقا ثري أتشيني تبلغي بثري أرخاثا بريشة أنه شو داري بريشة وكلي أنه هدامه بيشي مو بلخي جوداني شو داري بيشي قرية هدامه السناية يعني machine elements بإنجلس وأنه كلي مطخسنة والبوث مطاخستة ولايفة مطاخستة ولايفة إذا مكايلة نوثا أن كلها هدامة مكايلين اللي يرجدوا شولا وثرابة مني بيشة نزديرة غدغ بغزايا يوم خويانة بريشة قا ينجو نولة باثد نولة ين شوباب النولة إلكترونية قد مخاري أوري ومجابي هان هدامة دين سنيقة اللي قد ما بالخينة جودان التبناخة ميكانيكاية ادغزيلان قطوسات لن شيباقة شو داري شيباقاية إلى شيباقة عم بكراثا وإنها يعني أو بشي طايلة تري بكراثا وخاشي باقة إينا إيث تتنى زودة من دن بكراثا وآشي باقة والتاوي مثيخة وإيمان ديلة بغدار أغدو غزايا إذ دبنا بياشا لقرية دبنا ربيا وخادبنا إلى دبنا مثيخة قد باو دبنا مثيخة لمرخوطة يان زعابة لا يا بكرتا زعبتا وأن شي باقي إن قد أسمو بلخة من ألبا وشوا موشتي من شوريلا قوم صناعية جو يوروب جو إنجلند وبرا كل أطروات بخلطة أطرواتها يوروب وهل ثيلة تقبى برقاية من دار ثيلة تقبى برقاية لو يسني قناشة لن شو ضارقة أرخى ميكاني كيف مشضري عزيزوثا من خاشوبا الإسانة بريشة من هذا تلقوا عليه ومن شيتة 1935 أتشت شو داري دروالي جو مزيعاني دراي دياثا بخشون كل أخون يدوتون إما باتخ لنا شيء كاسيثة بزيعاني دراي دياثا بتخازي لن شي باغي قمر خطط هدامي اللي دور جدا بوصالة باي لن دانا رابا يرختا وداني متا خمتلا وأن شو داري شي بقاية اتني شمانة البث داخل صورتيهن يا بصليهن قطوسة اتلان شودارة صصايا بإنجلس يمري له في بيلز بس أخنا بليشانا اتلان صصة كذوت صصة هذا خيله اسكيمة صصة بدأ مرخله شودارة صصايا اتلان شودارة بطوخة فلات بطوخة شودارة بطوخة رابا بشط هلا شودارة اتنكاكي شودارة كاكاية خامدي مدمران رابا بشيطة لو هر متخله لان سوكالة دليشانة يوربناي قطوسة شيباقة كاكايا أو بياشالة موبل خجو خكمة مزيعانة درادياثا وخكمة منها مبلوخنة شيشلياثا لدور خرابت لي أربي زودم أربي صورياثا مقدم ما رودانا كريثا غزيلا قمدانا أيضا رغتت أو شورة قد شيباقة شيشلثاي بياشانة موبلخة جو السانة يان توقانة مصدر مرتاي بشيطة وث بياشانة موبلخة جو السانة معرزلة بث كليثالة موديلة نيشا من مبلغة هدخة شودارة وبغزايا وخاخة أن شودارة أبنى أو بشيطة إلى تري جغلة كاكانة عم غدا شيشلتا وأي شيشلتا هلبت مروكاوتا لمرابه الدامة وبياشاني خلقياتا والبوث كما يورخانة شيشلتا باي مش قال لنا شخام من يانت خلقياتا وبدوار الله أي شيشلتا غدا غزايا ليلة رابا بشطة أي شيشلتا اتلا مقدمارا بسقة بريشة لوخة دبنا وأنا لوخة دبنا إن مروكو عم سكياتا وخاضروان سكتا إفخا خلبة وخاضروان خلبة إفخا جاروما كل آها من دي قد كل آها زوعد بلدن هدامة هاوي جو ديا شيشلتا وجاوة بتاوي دوهانة زيتا ينمشخة قا مبصرت خكاكا ومبصرت أوخالة قد شيبتت دلا شيبي أن باثا يعني شطخة دن هدامة دين انقابة على الغدادة كونتاكت انقابة على الغدادة لخا صورتها بش مبيونة لا بس هر أو من دي لي هوجتانن لا مسقد النوخم بيه أنه هدامة وغدوغ بغزايا قد خلقتا خامنيانة هدامة وخلقت أدبار منا وهر هذا قد بريا شيشلتا وشيشلياتا اتلان خا مصدر مرخلة جرجة تري جرجة ينطلا جرجة والبث ليشانا انجليشايا مصدر مرخنا شيشلتا بشطة شيشلتا تامتام وشيشلتا تليثا ثيثا ليدن أن خجمة من ديانة والد بيش دريشة من ملشنانة داخي وبيمي أورخا كثوخنة أنا بدايون سوكالة خشاخ رابي جاي بس ليدن تورس مملائي داخي متقلة قد لخمة من ليشانا وأنا ليون لشنانا من هذا صنيقي ون بلخن عم لشنانة قد ماسخ أو دخا ليشانا طريسة قا دعثي بناثا وبنونا أبلغ خمغ غزيلا قمدانا إثوا شيباقة كانت مبلو بياشة لمبلغة يوم زيعانة درادياثا وخكمة مزيعانة مبلوخينة شيشلتا عم جغلة كاكانة وإتلان شودارة جرزاية بشرارة أو شودارة أتشت شودارة بشم معرزلة إلى شودارة جرزاية وثرابة أتشي شودارة جرزاية أن بشبشيطة بايشي قرية جرزة مدروناية تينا كاكي لابارة آنت اتلا كاكي لاجاوة وضغزايا اف كاكي طريسة اف كاكي بليمة يعني كاكي أبناية وأن تري سرنة هاوي شوية بس أطلاثة إن هاوية زاويثة بأربي وخمسة درغة ما صناشا متو لأن سرنة صليوايث كليثة لا السنيقوثة مغدون مارا ولا مغزوية لأي أن كاكي بليمة إنهاوي الدبنة سمالة يعني الدبنة ديمينة داخي ماسخ برشخ لا مغدادة خا صورتا رابا بشطة وتلان جورزة قمهاية أباني اتلان كاكي طريسة واتلان تكاكي قخلاناية وث هالبت جاي جغلة عم خالو لا مغدغ بزايخة شو دارا ما دالايا اين انتارج مخلم انجلس وورم توالعتا اين بش خبره يقوره لما تولي ما دالا هربو طوسه لهر ما بيثو ثيلا وتلان إيمان مبلوغ غدا قاطيثة كانت عم خا جغلا كان لي أورغ جودان بوصالة اتلان مغدون مارا أتش بريش ولخا مغزوي لمفطورانوثا دان جورزة كان دان جورزة مباخلتا من بشيط دخي وبشيطة الجورزة دورتناية وديوم يوما إما بلغ جورزة ديبة تتناقش تدبتا لي أورغ جودان شولاني كل من جودان بوصالة كل من دي بتبايش كذيوا بكثاون لجا فرقن ممرة وبتبارس اتلان صورة بدانا قربة ولخا بغزاية وخ كل مشختت خا جورزة وكاكت جورزة اخت اذبليشان انجليشايا ماسخ ما تغبليشان اطوراي مغدوتهم غزاية قما ينوخ يعني اتلم صيتا اتلم خاليشان رويخة وبسيمة ورعدة ضماصر ما بالخخلة يو كلها خقلة يو البناية بس اخنا والد ما كتشغل جانا وبغضو غزايا جورزة وشيشلياتا سنيقين الدوهانا ينزيثا قد ما رقي ما بصري اخكاكا وخالا الباثواثا يعني شطخ من هذا قد ازخ لا قامة مطورخ لليشانا سنقتل التاويلا هربي يعني جروبس أكاديمية بلخي عمل شنانه وكل أن هربة والتاوي صيرة بكرسي نينوى وخشلي خشخاتا وبيشي طويعة بس مدري خشل خشخاتا وشقخنا تاماها لقنا لنخامندي والد أن بيشي موبلخي يوم درشي هذا يكثاوي شورا ويو داعي وقاموا لا جو زمرة ومشخاتا ماني دخل بالد خام دم شخته بدجور زموت ما ربط شو ضاره دقته يعني قطوس خا ناشع يداي من كاتو خا مشخته خبه وما خذوثه مشامهده رغشه دي بدكيانا قضا قطوس بدامر خبه جو لبي دويقه وريده وشتيا من بمخ خمره نقايا وخبي اخنهره دقلت عشينا واللبخ خنونا جاوي بسخايا إن خام خارة ميكانيكاية ما بدامر طوتها ويلي لبي شو دارة بششل ثو جغلة مركبة بدومارة دمن خمسة خبخ سرني بغدارة ومغضر لبخ تعلي بسبارة ما تخرن قم دانا قد أن جورزة سنيقين الزيثة قد ما بصري خكاكة وخالة مدري ما صدامر منشق ياثق مشخي جورزة لبي طريبة دباصر خكاكة أبو خالة بشوبان قيبة دمدرش غادر بخاسور هاوا مث قبلانا تبصغى روخي بهونو قايا تخبى قنانا مور لماني لبشرو منطقايا مخارة ميكانيكايا ينخاناش عيادايا بدار شيخ لو من دي مشات خمرة بخوثاما بماريوان من جرزة الجرزة تبقى مشضريلة قد ماطل نيشة دمغدر لي سرنا دم وصل بجغلة بخالو لبريشة درد يا راديثا كل إيمت هاوي على البنزين ديشة ومن جرزة لبي بماريوان هاوتون رابا باسين
أو ترى وسيمة رابي تجوتا يعني متخري خدشة عبديشو بربريخة دانت شورالي كثاوة خبراني من اللي لازمها الشرح أو تشرح ديها خجا فيتا قد ناسي برميها يعني قلت لي خبراني رابع قمت تعدل الخبراني رابا كثاوي دي فعود بسيمة رابا لو كل خانو طبعا يتسنقوتا الملشنانة ميرو أنا خشمجاني أخ ملشنانا بس بيسودا من أخديا ناشديا بايخ ناشد براكتيكاي يعني خي يوماي مودي سبيقين اللي يتنخا خبرة ميروخ يعني خدا ملثا طوليثة إن أمر الطوليثة ليا درام أمرتها طوليثة احنا ناشدين Tur-Abdin كله ليه قبلي منه لأن أي يومي أي طوليثة لا ما أودخ يعني يتنخا قطرة دانت أود خبرة خاتا ملثا خاتا لازم متخمنت برابة من ديانة لا بس قربة تخادروانوخ بس أنا رابا خديلي بدايا ملتا ديوخ ورابا اتلي ثورة وهيفي بعتي دوثة تخازق خات تورس أو كوناش ملة تقنيقاية دي تخ دماغ قارخلي وبلكم خشخخلي جو يوماتا أو ليشانا يومايا ديا بدخلنا قابو قارد يوخن جو تخمنتي نيكولاس آتن بقر خاجا بقر خوا خورند بارخ باخد بس هلو لي خا
خش أثي لخ
خا ميكروفون خمامر
لا قد قال
هلو لي لا قد قال أبوش أخا
بس لغة يعني برون خطبة الإنجليزي بعض البابين مسؤولة لبني يقول خانا ميكانيكاية لا الكيان. There is no mechanic working without tools. وببخايا بسبب جلبنا من أوهاتا شمالي طورنامية screwdrivers. شمالي تشاكوشا ومملكة جو. وهذا أصبح مشروع بالبلد شان الآليات دي أما يمكن مختارة وقالت إذا أدهل شبه الآليات عند الزنجار tools دي مثلا تواصلنا دي مشاهرة دي كيميائية يعني جزء كبابات
اللي يدن أمبرم لي بوقارة بس باقورة إن إتلان كونا شملة يعني لكسيقون تأني خشخاثة توقنايا تخيل إني شوخ
إتلان شمد
الكياتا موديل tools مبلوخة لرابي أو ديشو ملكو جو كونا شملة بمارة لآمورة بس آمورة مبلوخة لقتولز وكإنسترومنتس قطرواي مبلوخة لخشخة آمورة أيضا مرة كاتشوك خبرا نخراي لبليشانا يمرخ مطرقتا إنه سكرو درايفر اللي يدن موديل الشمة إث مقدون مرة جاو لكسي كنت رابي أو ديشو ملكو إث أقباثا خرطت مالش ميول باني وإث خام دي باصورة هل بتلت خام دي كميلة إث ميرخا جقالي آمر مشارخ باسوعتا لمسخ تاويلا خام دي جميرة بس أخني مايلا إطلام برصوبة لخا وتاما بتشاخينة بوادين خامن دي إنا أخنا نعلث ديان ليه ما صخ بلخ مغدادي أب ملبانا أبرم تخروالي جو دولو ما دقامايا أخني سنيقة بلخ مغدادي لا إيخي دا إيث من هتك سنيقة لاني هربة ولاني سياحاثا بلخ مغدادي
إيمان هو وشخ مامل أهدي دعتي بهاوي مخمري بنيا اللشانة نخراي ينقتلن من ديانة هذا مجانا مشخوف أو لخوه
بس قطوسة إيمان دون بكثاو أنا خامندي أنا ليه ما صمت أمر الناشخين إيمان دون بكثاو خامندي إيمان ما تشوخون إيمان بطايون جو لكسيقون وما تشوخون أو خبرت دون سنيقة اللي ما بلوخون لي إيمان لث أنا ما تقول لبلي شانن هرلو سوكالا دي لبلي شانن هذا إنجليشايا خخجاية من ليشانا سويدايا بشيل الخامق سورد من ليشانا إنجليشايا خكما من ديانة يوتاني داني ليشانا هرخامن دي لسوكالا خخجا بريشا يعني كليثة لداخل والد لخمة ليشانا إيث قد ما صنع بالخلة ولا هوي خبرة ياقورة كم ماسخ دو دخل خبرة بشيطة بش بشطة بتويقة ما بلغته بش ناشب قبليله
سبب أساس الدول إلى إكلن جاواني والبلد هي وناشد إلى جنيوس ميكانيكو أن يلبي الشمان من جانب إلى بليار أو بالصوب أو بالجانب فهاي بينهم نلبي أو نشان ميكانيكس.
أنا لي يدن عند 12 خينة بس أنا أتلي صورة خايومة بالداوخ خضراشة جو بتصوبة يوم خاروثا ميكانيك فبلي شانا أما يوم.
أوكي أول بسيمة رابع طاقت.
رابع طلبة بسيمة المملكية إبو خملت أيضا جام أرسو بايد تلو تخمنت الماضي وتخليتي كون المبدأ خبراني جو دخلت الميكانيك ومن تريانا بطي خبرانا خاطئ جو تكنولوجيز أخرنا بلشانا سورة دخ يماركيروتنا دخ يمامروتنا خبرانا خاطئ.
أنا مقدم مرة أنا متوين للبث سوكالي مودي لسوكالي جو لشانا نخراي لشانا إنجليشايا متوين لهذا لشانا طرايا من دي ترى أنا كل من دي دون كثي ولا إما دون كثاوة مش يعني خشخت بلشانا طرايا كثاون أب إنجليشايا وكل أنا دون كثي ولا كثي واثي أنا طيون مشضرن قدونا عشان قدي سعتا دبايم بلطة خا لكسيكون ومن هذا أنا يعني موديل نيشي وأب اتلي صورة قد كرسيتني إلى أو قنطرون دبت بلغخ كلان قد كتخا بو مدلانا يوثت اتلي مدمرة أنا شو لي ميكانيكي بس إنه خاملشنانا بشغل لأني خشخاثا ومشخلبنا قد لخمي لي شانايث وبلكي خشمان خشخاثا لا بشي قبيلة ليذن أنا من جيبت جاني متوين أني خشخاثا مخشوخون إجا كليثا الملشنانة إن قبيلة يعني لا
بسيمة رابع فرن
الشمودي الوالد هنا الأخيط الملابيق أحمد من كان سمت وشعبا بهاوي بوي بسع البلخة النمل لخاك لا بهاوي المسكين بتاعها بخوري بس كرسي نيمة ميخانيك ولا مكبوشي تون أمان لا الدين بيقى عديد أمان الحقيقة التكنولوجي الأهم مال نشان الطريق أو كيون شمل البعض هاوي مخشوة البال الشانة والبال من دي خالد بال الشانة من السبب هاوي السحة الملكة أكاديميكاية أطورايا التايم حامل ناظر مرة الشانة النظرة يظهرنا أن يكون working group results الشان تشريح الشان لا يظهر كل شيء
أود بسيمة نيكولا هدية دورخي نيكولاس
أوكي لا سبايدر أوكي رابي وشان رابي شابه في جمزة الدولة دي إذا تتخشف خشات خاطر يعني هابي البعض مرة من يعني الشاعر يقول يعني كل الشاعر
مخارة
فأنا قارئ أمانة إلى لو بخشاوة مسبحانية كانت زي شايب والشاعر لدن خارم وأروايا إذا بخشاوة خشخات خاطر يضغط لدن خارم وأروايا جراماتيكالي تورس من بعيد بيشن بختري شان بيشن ليه بيفرق خشختنا إتهاوي بيشن مخلاده إنه تضيف بخشالة خبر خاطر قال كان خبراني خطماسي بيش بتروي رأسه مسيانيفة الأمر مش خانيفة بقوصة وبناش إنه بالخير مشهورية يعني مشهورية يعني مخلوقة تموزة وكاكو إتصبر الشبابة لين خزي خبر الشبابة يعني ليه يظل إني لك خبر أطوراي شيء يعني ومن إقامة يعني ما بخشاوة المهم قد خوشف تعز خيره شرط خبر خاطر من ترى خبر الجرزة ما يكلم بتاعي سبب أنا يدن جرزة إلى خالص القيسة إذا ما يكلم نفس القيسة رواية كير وبس معه
بوقار قالي متخري أنا ليون بلشنانا ووالد بلغغ من بلشنانة ووالد بلغغ بتروى العزة أخنيت لن خالي شانا عطيرة وكلن العزة عطرة لجولي شانا وشقلق شو هاربية وبلغغ بيها من دي ترى خبرت جورزاش قلي من لكسيق اندرابي أو ديشو مالكو اللي يدن دي لأقردية لشانا طرايا نخرايا اللي يدن أنا شقلي من لكسيقون وأبشي باقة من تامة لهرجو لكسيقون اجي أنا
شو
فلاني لنمي
نيكولاس احنا نتلن شو باقو يا ريمن يا شو باقو ايوه شباق شباقة لا يعني هاوي طبعا برست هاوي دانا وابتا ماسخ يتوخ وامقخ يعني دزوتا بتهاوي سباي ان ماسخ اودخ خبراني خاتي داوي برميلي او مخشقي كل لعزة ديان او لشانة جداوي بس ان هاوي خد خدقاني او تاني خين اللي او دي لابرهم نورو بشوية ودلي قيمتد لوخت خبراني خاتي ماي ومش قادرين للأكاديمية لشانة سوريا جو بغداد هدية أنا تيلي اللي من قام كما شاباتي خام شضر ألبا وطلمة وأسرى خبراني خاتي إيه من قاني ويديلي ناشي بالخي بغداد بلكي بالت خامن دي سباي بس أول ناشا من قاني ولتلي ليلة لشاناج قاني يعني مريت سيقوتا يعني سنيقوتا ليلة مليانتا لازم أودخ بيزودا من سنيقوتا يتوغ مغدادة بارمغزي فهو تنرابا بسيمة دانا مليتة لا أو ترابا طبعا
خبر خبر بونايا قد أن كل مسخة زغنة مخشخياتا إما دون أنا كتاوة خامدي مخشختا إلا من هاتخ كباشوخ لهات خلو ما دي قدر شخ أني من ديانة
دوس
بخلطة
أو ترابا بسيمة
بسيمة رابا بسيمة
Funciona. Siéntate aquí. Okay, let's go now. Let's move to the next session. Métete por otro lado. ¿Está? I have the pleasure to present one of special persons of Hebrew and Aramaic studies of the University of Salamanca. Bega, she started for the first time, long time ago, as a student of Hebrew and Aramaic studies, and now she has become colleague. So she is now associate professor at the Department of Hebrew and Aramaic Studies, and it's somehow a special pride for me
Because if we teach, we do a big effort, but we don't create school, then it will become hard to survive for all those aspects that we fight for. So this is why I'm very, very happy having her here. She has been somehow fruit of our hands from the beginning until now. She's colleague. At the beginning, when she started, it was really a hard process, starting from zero, and now she's mastering especially in late Aramaic period, which we call Syriac or Gishma, and so on. Today she will talk, as you see, about a topic which is also important in order to know how such studies are really developed in Europe, because due to the new, how would I say, new situation, many studies, many degrees have been fused. I don't in how many sub degrees, and then there is nothing left. At the end, you don't know whether you are studying this and that. And here in Salamanca, we are happy to have still the Hebrew and Aramaic studies as a whole degree. And she will talk a bit about the development of late Eastern Aramaic studies in Europe. We have several universities, Cambridge, Freie Berlin, among many others. But you will be surprised for sure about her exciting conference. She has been publishing many articles. She defended her dissertation here, and we are now working on several projects that will come out hopefully in the future. So I still count on her, and I'm happy that if I arrive to the period where I have to retire, then she will continue for many other years. The role is yours, Vega. Thank you.
Thank you, Ephraim. Thank you very much. Good morning or good afternoon. I am glad to gather with some of you again in this second Congress and to have the opportunity to meet some of you for the first time as well. Welcome to Salamanca, our city, my city, and to our university, and I am sure you will enjoy your stay. In this conference, as you can see in the slide, I aim to show a brief overview of the development of late Eastern Aramaic studies in Europe from around the 13th century until recent times. This is the index of my presentation. I will start with a classification of the Aramaic linguistic group, focusing on late Eastern Aramaic, and going on with how the study of this language was developed in Europe, finishing with some important points about the topic related to the University of Salamanca. The Aramaic language belongs to the Semitic family of languages. It is more accurate to describe Aramaic as a linguistic group made of different languages and dialects, because all its varieties, despite their geographical spread, share linguistic features that form a continuum from the oldest times to the recent ones. In this slide, we can see the classification of the Aramaic linguistic group according to Yildiz, Rivera Florit, and Rubin, who follow a previous division into 5 main stages proposed by Fittmeyer in 1979. The 5 main stages are ancient, imperial, middle, late, and modern Aramaic. I aim to focus on the language so-called and commonly known as Syriac, which is one of the most important dialects of the middle and late stages, as we can see in the slide. Syriac is the name given by several Indo-European languages, Syriac in English, Syriac in French, Syriaco in Spanish, to an Aramaic language originally spoken in Urhai, also known by its Macedonian name, Edessa, the current city of Sanliurfa in the southeast of Turkey, over 50 kilometers far from the border with Syria. The preeminence of Edessa is due to its geographical situation of crossroads in the Near East, and it has had a significant relevance through the ages. According to Yildiz, the term Syriac is inaccurate from historical and linguistic approaches. Although in this communication I don't have enough time to explain, I follow his reasoning and I will make use of Late Eastern Aramaic instead of Syriac in order to refer to this language. Late Eastern Aramaic is one of the most important languages of the Aramaic linguistic group. As we could see in the previous slide, it has two main periods, and as we can see also in this one, the Old period belongs to the Middle Aramaic stage, and the Classical one is included in the Late Aramaic stage. Christianism spread over Near East in early times. Edessa is traditionally considered the first town whose rulers converted to this faith. The Late Eastern Aramaic versions of Old and New Testaments date back from the 2nd century CE. These are some of the points why various Christian communities born in the Eastern Roman Empire, as well as in the Sassanid Empire, adopted Late Eastern Aramaic as liturgical and cultural language since the 3rd century CE, reaching a preeminent position. The Christological controversies about the nature or natures of Christ provoked in the 5th century a dogmatic schism along with a geographical and linguistic division into two dialects, Eastern and Western. Both groups shared the same language, but they used separate alphabetic scripts and vowel systems. Late Eastern Aramaic reached its peak during the 7th and 8th centuries, when these communities disseminated across the East to current India and China. After the Muslim conquest, Arabic language replaced it progressively as cultural and vehicular language, facing a significant decline over the 14th century. Today, it remains as the liturgical and literary language of several Christian churches spread through the Near and the Middle East, as well as other parts of the world. Regarding Late Eastern Aramaic literature, it was developed by clergy in the frame of schools of theology, where they studied and carried out an important translation movement of Greek text into their language. The manuscripts they translated were mainly biblical versions and patristic literature, along with secular text from a wide range of sciences such as philosophy, medicine, mathematics, grammar, rhetoric, among many others. All the classical knowledge collected was incorporated into their own Late Eastern Aramaic exegetical, literary, and scientific production. After the Muslim conquest in the 7th century, the Abbasid caliphs sponsored the translation of the Greek philosophical and scientific literature into Arabic language through Late Eastern Aramaic, thanks to polyglot translators in these three languages. Muslim scholars also incorporated all this classical knowledge into their own scientific and literary production, which would be later rediscovered in Latin Europe during the Middle Ages. Late Eastern Aramaic has been studied by its own scholars and masters for many centuries. In the field of grammar, some names stand out, such as Joseph Husaya, the polymath Yakub of Edessa, Elijah of Nisibis, Elijah of Tirhan, Isoyah bar Malcolm, Yohanan bar Sobi, and Severos bar Shakko, and the other greatest polymath, Gregorios bar Ebroio. Regarding lexicography, the lost works written by the translator Hunayn ben Ishaq were used as the basis of the late Eastern Aramaic Arabic lexicon of Ishobar Ali, as well as the encyclopedic lexicon of Hassan bar Bahlul. I proceed with the third point of my communication, focused on the development of late Eastern Aramaic studies in Europe. In 1311, Pope Clement V convened a council in the French town of Vienne. One of the constitutions promulgated during the assembly referred to the teaching of Oriental languages through the establishment of chairs at the medieval European universities. It was ordered that there should be scholars with appropriate knowledge of Hebrew, Arabic, and Chaldaic, 2 experts per each language at the universities of Salamanca, Oxford, Paris, and Bologna, in order to spread the Christian faith among the heathen peoples. In this context, the term Chaldaic, or even Chaldean, refers to Biblical and Targumic Aramaic. This constitution is the starting point, or at least one of the most important ones, for the study and teaching of these languages in Europe. In this slide, we have a fragment of the constitution we are talking about, English translation by Tanner. We have stipulated, with the approval of the Sacred Council, that schools be established for the following languages wherever the Roman Curia happens to reside, and also at Paris, Oxford, Bologna, and Salamanca. That is, we decree that in each of these places there should be Catholic scholars with adequate knowledge of Hebrew, Arabic, and Chaldaic. There are to be 2 experts for each language in each place. They shall direct the schools, make faithful translations of books from these languages into Latin, and teach others those languages with all earnestness, passing on a skillful use of the language, so that after such instruction these others may, with inspiring, produce the harvest hoped for, propagating the saving faith among the heathen peoples. Dikran,
can you
please take this remote control, the black one. Yes, and please, okay. Okay, thank you. Late Eastern Aramaic became subject of study for research purposes, but also for a missionary aim from the 16th century. The first generation of European scholars were made up of authors such as Ambrogio degli Albonesi, Wittmann-Stedda, Postel, or Massius, together with their religious Aramaic speakers Moshe of Mardin or Yohanan Sulaka, among others. These authors were devoted to the printing of late Eastern Aramaic grammars in Latin and late Eastern Aramaic biblical versions, such as the Pshuta New Testament and the text included in the polyglot Bibles of Antwerp, Paris, and London. The Maronite Asemani family were particularly important for these studies during the 18th century. Above all, the figure of the first custodian of the Vatican Library, Joseph Simon Asemani. As a papal legate, he brought to Rome a huge amount of late Eastern Aramaic manuscripts from various monasteries in Egypt, Syria, and Lebanon, which he compiled in his masterpiece, Bibliotheca Orientalis Clementino Vaticana. This work is considered the first history of late Eastern Aramaic literature written in Europe. Between the 19th and 20th centuries, new late Eastern Aramaic manuscripts arrived at the British Museum and other European libraries, and this discipline became independent from the sphere of theological studies and turned into a secular field of research. In this period, various of the still today reference works about late Eastern Aramaic language were published, such as those of Nuldeke, Duval, Payne-Smith, and Brockelman. Aramaic-speaking scholars maintained their tradition of research about late Eastern Aramaic studies. These are the cases of Toma Audo and his late Eastern Aramaic lexicon, Simtad Leshana Süryaya, and Adai Sher, one of the victims of the Assyrian genocide of 1915, who published manuscript catalogs together with editions and translations of several works from late Eastern Aramaic literature in European journals and publishing houses. During the 20th century, late Eastern Aramaic studies underwent a significant increase in all areas: language, literature, history, and culture, not only in Europe but all over the world. British Professor Sebastian Brock stands as the most renowned scholar regarding this field. His career started 60 years ago when he got his PhD by Oxford, and it encompasses more than 300 publications. He has been recognized by several honorary doctorates and prizes. Nowadays, the development of ICT, information and communication technology, and the global access to Internet has led to an unprecedented boom for these studies. It has made possible the digitalization of manuscripts and discontinued works freely available online, or the publishing of digital volumes and journals, among other projects. The current lines of research are focused on gender studies, along with interdisciplinary approaches to the analysis of contacts among different languages, literatures, cultures, and religions. In order to finish my presentation, I aim to offer a brief overview of these studies about late Eastern Aramaic in our university, as well as 2 examples of the significant collection of our historical library related to this topic. The University of Salamanca, founded in 1218, was one of the universities mentioned in the Constitution of Vienne we have talked about. So, since the 14th century, Arabic, Hebrew, and Aramaic were taught in our university. The teaching of these languages passed by a broken path because of the difficulties to find masters with appropriate knowledge of them, and the chair was suppressed in the 19th century. The current Hebrew and Aramaic studies area was restored in the University of Salamanca in 1990. In the cloister of the historical building of the university that we could visit last year, there is a Latin inscription above the entrance of the classroom where these languages were taught that can be translated into English as "For Hebrew, Chaldaic, Arabic, and Greek languages, so that everything is open access to wisdom, Senate established public teaching." In 2019, the exhibition "The Keys of Knowledge" was held at the university. It was an exhibition of grammars and dictionaries of several classical and oriental languages, in particular Latin, Greek, Hebrew, Aramaic, and Arabic. All the works exhibited are preserved in the Historical Library of the University of Salamanca. Its website, highly recommended, is still available in order to look for information and bibliography about these languages, along with pictures of the works and biographies about their authors. Regarding Late Eastern Aramaic, grammars and dictionaries written in Latin were exhibited, such as those of Teseo Ambrogio degli Albonesi and Guy Lefebvre, from which I have chosen some pictures. The preservation of these two works, printed in the 16th century in Pavia and Antwerp, respectively, is an indication of the importance of the collection of the historical library. In this picture, we can see a page from the work of Ambrogio, printed in Pavia in 1539, where the letters of the alphabet are written and described in two different scripts, Estrangela in red and Certo in black for the Western dialect, as we can see. The Estrangela in red, as I have said, and Certo in black. This is other page from the same work, in particular some fragments of text written in Certo script, included as exercises to practice the language. And because it's a grammar written in Latin translation, as we can see in the other page. The other author is Guy Lefebvre, and his work is Syriacae Linguae Prima Elementa, printed in Antwerp in 1572. In the left picture, we can see the alphabet written and described in three scripts, in this case, Estrangela, Certo, and square script, as we can see. Estrangela, this one, Certo, this other one, and this square one. Okay. In the right picture, we can see several prayers in these three different scripts, as we can see in the other one, and also the Latin translation, sorry. The same in these two pictures. The last one is Lord's Prayer, Our Father who art in heaven, abunde veshmaya, abunde veshmayo, as we can see in this case. Okay. That's all on my behalf. Thank you for your attention. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Bega, for this excellent presentation of an experience. You know, I have been doing a long research on why the name, the Aramaic name was then called the Targumic Chaldee. I think, and I came to the conclusion that reading the commentary of San Jerome, the whole, let's say, misleading term in a sense was, in my opinion, started there. And this is why the ancient universities like Bologna, Paris, Salamanca, and Oxford, they used that due to that commentary of the second chapter, 2:4b, when it starts from the Hebrew, and then it starts Malka al-Almin Hayi Aymar Halma al-Abdai Ubshrana Hawi An Malka Baymar al-Kazdai. And this is probably the biblical Aramaic that then he said, okay, if the Kazdai or the Chaldai are mentioned there, then the commentary has become a reference, and since then at the universities the Chaldaic language, it refers to the Targumic Aramaic, has been called Chaldaic. So it has nothing to do with the so-called Chaldeans or the Chaldean community, but it refers somehow to the professionals who were able to read the stars and to make interpretation of the so-called dream of Nebuchadnezzar. Okay, and now we have a short period, so at about 5-6 minutes for questions or commentaries, but please be brief because I think now it's time to think on a much more important period where the stomach is so calling to have Spanish wine as it's called. So if there is any question, yes, please.
Well, thank you very much. What you showed us that there's a commitment here in Salamanca, so it's not only the university, but also the whole community here at the university to continue teaching these languages and doing research and so on. And that's nice that we have you, Alfredo, and the others, but I hope it will maintain for the future. It is our commitment. Thank you very much.
No, thank you. Yeah, I'm very happy that we have other two.
I would have something like that. I would write it anyway. Everybody, you have to.
Yes, I'm happy in the sense that we are working on the continuity because such studies are somehow under danger if we don't really fight for them, and Professor Jeffrey Khan knows as well. But let's hope that to keep it alive and to also to enlarge it, because we have other 3 PhD dissertations here, and one of them is still now teaching, and hopefully once he finishes he will also have the chance like Bega. But we have also Isabel here who teaches, but she didn't dare to make a conference in English, so but next time she will be obliged, whether she wants or not, she will participate. Good. Other question? Yes, Dr. Robert Karakian?
You mentioned new technology, computers, and things of that sort. How do you see that being incorporated in what you're doing and teaching and preserving the language?
No le he oído muy bien.
We didn't hear well your question. Can somebody give Dr. Robert the microphone, please?
You mentioned new technology and computers and digitization.
Oh.
Artificial intelligence. How do you see that becoming a part of what you're doing?
Related to the way how I teach my subjects, I apply or I make use of these new technologies. For example, one of my subjects, which is in particular this Late Eastern Aramaic, I make use of videos following the flipped classroom methodology, which is based on the autonomy of the student. I have created, or I have prepared some short videos, and I give all this material, all these digital materials to the students previous or before the classroom, and they work, they prepare, they study the material at home or in an autonomous way. And during the class, we only focused on resolving or on solving doubts, and in practicing in practical exercises, that it's more effective than if I have to invest time in explain all these concepts, because all concepts are new for my students, were new at the beginning for me. This is one of the ways.
And if I may to add to this, I was going to announce it later on, but we are going to use also the platforms. I have still 2 structures of the modern Assyrian language, of 2 courses that will be launched as official courses, additional courses to what we have, in order to teach the language online. This is also very important to look for those means that are available, that are also to have an access to the language, not only in the halls, on the classrooms, but also in the digital, let's say, world.
Mm-hmm.
And I hope to count on Nicholas as a victim for the first classes. The structure is done. I would have announced it later, but just as far as the question is concerned, we will, if we are successful, launch 2 courses as Shabbat Alai has done in his whole platform, also for the Eastern and Western dialects, teaching them to the kids, to the adults, and so on. So this is one of the main projects of the Nineveh Chair. And I'm sure that the universities will gradually put their forces together to create a bigger platform, and where we can share this beautiful language we have. Yeah, Professor Jeffrey Khan.
Mm.
Very much for your very nice overview of history of the field. I mean, you said a key point, a key turning point in your studies was, of course, this Council of Vienna, and in a way we need a similar thing perhaps today. We need some kind of authoritative council to actually ensure the continuation of the studies in this field. Now, of course, the Council of Vienna was concerned very much with theology. As you said, it was for conversion of Christianity or various people. But as you were showing, I mean, the sort of more modern study of the language is very much a more secular part of the humanities. And today, this field is within the humanities rather than theology or predominantly so. Now, I wonder what your thoughts were about, whether this is, how can we argue within the humanities, in which we have a much larger competition, as it were. We are competing against the whole of humanity. Does this weaken our position? When we come to the end of very much the authority of the church behind it, but now we are a small field within the humanities, within the wide university. How can we argue our case? How can we actually persuade the universities to support us when we have a much more competition? And if you have any thoughts on having actually looked at the history of the field, what are our strong points?
In our case, Salamanca is one of the 9 provinces of the Castilla y León region or community. And in Spain, the legal competencies about education in general are distributed into the different Spanish regions. In our case, the government of our region, Castilla y León, has declared these studies as very important or significant, because these studies in Salamanca is the only university that which offers these studies among the 4 public universities in Castilla y León. So we have an administrative or a legal or an institutional support in order to maintain these studies. Related to how we can preserve or persuade students, it's very difficult. In our degree, Hebrew and Aramaic studies degree, we have a very heterogeneous profile of students. Students from 18 years old and students who are in his 60s or even in his 70s. And each one has a completely different aim or goal in order to apply or to enroll in our degree. Our value or the value of our degree is that we offer a unique curriculum or a unique curriculum among other universities, and we offer a completely individual attention for the students, and we are trying to enroll our students from that point. But it's very difficult because right now in general students or teenagers, because they enroll the university at 18 years old, they want to study careers or degrees that in order to achieve or in order to get a short-term result. And this is not the case of humanity studies. It's a very complex question.
If I may to add, because I have been fighting for such purposes inside the department, in the faculty, in the university, in the regional government, each time the president from 2018 until 2022, each time the president of the regional government met me, oh, the exotic studies, we have to be also positive. If you don't transmit, it's not difficult, it's feasible. So this policy is needed. But here at the Faculty of Philology, when we shifted into this new ECT system, we combined the studies in a way where really there was a chance for all those degrees that were considered minority degrees or minor degrees that haven't such a high number of students that could share the first 2 years together. And this has been also one of the, let's say, ways where no of the degrees that were established at the University of Salamanca was just cut. And this has been also one of the advantages, where Salamanca has become a kind of reference. While Madrid, Barcelona, Granada refuse with the Islamic and Arabic studies, we are only the unique one who has a real Hebrew and Aramaic studies, which doesn't mean that we don't have complementary courses of Arabic language and other Russian, German, Italian. But I insisted to focus on having a solid basis in the two main languages that are part of this degree. So this was probably one of the chances. But she's right, you have to fight for every day, you have to be in this, in that, in order to tell them that such studies are needed. And this is why each time they tell me, what do you teach? My answer is exotic issues. And then I explain what we study. But first, positive. And this has probably helped us a bit to have much more access also at the regional government level, even in the central government, that they see the need of keeping alive such degrees. So in that sense, we should not just see the negative part, but we have to see the possibilities. And this is probably what we have tried to do here, and this is why we have been able to keep the degree as it is. I think we have arrived to the end. Now, I'm thankful to you. Big applause for and just some practical notes and information.
Hey, na,